And I'll let the people in,
let the people in the room and let me know, Annabelle, when we're ready to get going. Are you ready, Kathy?
Yes, I'm ready. Yep.
Excellent. We have a good number of people here in the room.
Hi, everybody.
How many exactly? But
Hi,
Wonderful.
Kathy.
Hi.
it was a gap a dozen, but that was a real gas. The extrasensory perception can count these days.
we are ready to go.
All right, folks, I will not delay. I'm going to just say how thrilled I am to welcome Dr. Catherine Richardson, who is fortunately for us, appointed to our department for a 3-year term from Communication Studies. Kathy's a Concordia University Research Chair in Indigenous Healing Knowledges, and we're really, really delighted to have her with us today to talk about her groundbreaking work in response-based practice. So I will hand it right over to you, Kathy. Started.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about contextualizing human responses to adversity and suffering. So I made a little PowerPoint for you. So I'll start by acknowledging the land. We're on the unceded land of the Kanien'kehá:ka, known as Georgiage or De Georgiage in Montreal here. And in Anishinaabemowin, it's Muniang. And so this has long been a place of meeting and trade for many indigenous groups, including the Huron-Wendat and Abenaki. And we also want to acknowledge Mother Earth and our role here as caretakers and trying to be good guests on this land. And yeah, you'll probably recognize a little bit about this picture here. Also about being an ally to the Mohawk people in times of need. So I've got a few quotes I'd like to start with just to set the stage for this talk. So Viktor Frankl said, "For the meaning of life differs from man to man or person to person, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment." So, similarly, Václav Havel said, "The truth is never a fixed abstraction, never a totalizing ideology, never something one person owns. The truth is always evolving, relational, and grounded in lived human experience." So, someone may have their own truth, but it's connected to how they're living in the world around them, how others are acting and treating them, all sorts of environmental and social factors. And M. Cesar, a well-known anti-colonial philosopher, said, "I have a different idea of a universal rich with all that is particular, rich with all the particulars there are, the deepening of each particular, the coexistence of all of them." So I guess what I'd like to say about this is that when I do response-based practice, we have a framework and a way of thinking about interaction, but to talk about it with people, to talk about what's happening in their life, we need to focus in on a particular interaction or circumstance to understand how they're managing or negotiating a certain situation. So we avoid generalizing as much as we can. So just to give a bit of context, and here we get a little bit political, a society that denies the violence of its colonial past and present cannot be relied upon to respond adequately to any form of violence. Instead, the institutions of that society can be relied upon to conceal the violence and related forms of administrative domination, obscure or fully conceal the responsibility of those who have perpetrated violence, conceal the ongoing and multifaceted resistance of those who have been victimized, and blame and pathologize those who have been victimized as deficient others, using colonial folk terms and the formal language of the colonial institutions. And that can include mental health frameworks. As noted in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and 2S LGBTQQ1A plus People National Action Plan, these discursive operations are inherent to the colonial state, past and present. So when we focus on social interaction in context, we're likely to get a better and richer understanding of what's going on for a person, someone who comes to see us, a client, or even just talking with a friend or a colleague. So violence is committed. Oh, I should give you a content warning. I'm going to talk a little bit about violence. Not too many graphic details, but sort of part of the topic today. Violence is committed on the level of social interaction involving at least two people in natural, material, social, cultural contexts. It follows that close analysis of social interaction, actions by perpetrators and victims in the context of these interactions, is the first step in understanding violence and resistance. And we just use the terms as, situational and descriptive terms in a context. It's not an identity term or a totalizing term. Somebody can be a perpetrator one day and a victim the next day, and vice versa. Just because I know some people say I'm not a victim. Explanations are secondary. We cannot ask what caused a particular set of actions or experiences without first looking closely at the particulars of those actions. We cannot ask what caused anger or depression or trauma unless we first have an understanding of what those experiences entail, what they mean. This is derived culturally and socially. So I'm going to give you an example that I think will, I guess, focus in or highlight the meaning of interactions in context. So this is by Zarlasht Halamazai. In November 2023, The Guardian UK published an essay by Zarlasht Halamazai titled, I Remember the Silence Between the Falling Shells, The Terror of Living Under Siege as a Child. Halamazai is an Afghan-born British writer and founder of Anna.org, who was forcibly displaced from Kabul when she was 11 years old and arrived in the UK at 15. It is a personal essay written in indignation at the mass killing of children in Israel and Palestine. I have copied 3 excerpts below in the order presented in the original. It begins, I was 10 years old in 1992 when Kabul was bombarded by warring forces, and life became a cycle of hunger, fear, and horror. Then, as now, children bear the brunt of war. I remember in those moments when the rockets started, the dialogue that would play in my mind. There is the sound of a rocket being fired. Will it come for me? Will it tear my body apart? Could I live without a leg or an arm? Will I want to if I can't climb the almond tree in our garden? Will I see the killing of my sister or brother? I avoided looking at certain members of my family in those moments. I couldn't look at my mother because the sheer terror in her face broke my heart. I couldn't look at my little sister and my little brother because somehow I felt ashamed that this was their childhood. They were so little, 5 and 6 years old, and everything I'd been taught about right and wrong made me feel a searing shame that this was their childhood. I couldn't look at my mother's sister because she was the only one who expressed what we were all feeling. She would sob and cry as the sounds grew nearer. The only safe person for me to look at was Granny, who would hold as many children as she could and cite the Quran patiently, only now and then stopping to implore my aunt to stop crying. As a child, it was so clear to me what needed to be done. I would get angry after each experience of hiding from the shells. I didn't understand it then, but there was such intelligence in my anger. So, what I wanted to point to there is you can see the subtlety in all the communication and meaning making in the glance of an eye, who we decide to look at, who we decide to not make eye contact with, who can hold us and receive our glance, and who can't manage to do that. And as a small child, making all these decisions, whereas if she went to a psychologist here, in Canada, maybe she would just be described as a traumatized child, or something like that. So, yeah, a lot of our work understands the importance of dignity and resistance. And so it could be an act of resistance to cry or to not cry, to look or not look, because there's deep understanding behind it. And I think as helpers and counselors and therapists, this is part of our deep role, is to try to understand and not rush to a formulation and then a problem that needs to be addressed through therapy, rather than holding the person, all of the context, their story, their history, and the way that they make meaning of it, and then what is most important for them to talk about. So I know if my colleague, Dr. Alan Wade, was sitting with that girl in a therapy room, he would probably spend a lot of time asking how she made the decision to look at some people in the eye and decided it wasn't safe enough or it wasn't appropriate to look at other people in the eye. And these micro actions and all the thought that goes into it point to pre-existing ability, capacity, our ability to interpret and understand the world, that kind of thing. And it relates to the dignity of people that will pay attention to these very important decisions that they're making. So this is a diagram by Alan's daughter, Liv Wade. Isque is, as you know, means woman in Anishinaabemowin or Cree. My Cree name is Kinu Isqueu, and Isqueu is a version of Isque. So dignity exists in every culture, but it has different names and different meanings. In Sweden, it's värdighet, the act of being worth or worthwhile, worth something. Dignity in the many ways that we think about that here. And from an Indigenous perspective, I think about it as the spiritedness. When we're born, we come into the world with this life force. We've just come from another world, and it's that spirit that's in us. And the more we're loved and cherished and upheld, the more this spirit can grow. And if we're harmed in different ways or humiliated, we may make a decision to pull in some of our spirit or our life force to protect ourselves. Mana is the word that the Maori people used to talk about, dignity as an active presence in our life and something that must be attended to in the social world, to avoid humiliating other people. And at certain times, in order to protect one's mana, different people or different tribal groups might actually, go to war or start fighting. So preserving mana is very important. In some of the Asian countries, they talk about saving face. And Yukon, in the Yukon, in the Casca culture, they talk about Dene Atnis, and which is I guess you could say, a set of protocols for living, where certain acts are sacred and important, and certain things must be avoided because we don't want to hurt or humiliate other people. So, in our world, the social life is largely organized around the according and preserving of dignity. We do things, we laugh at jokes that have failed because our friend told them. We'll ignore the fact that somebody just like let wind in the room and it's smelly because we don't want them to feel silly or bad. We do lots of minor courtesies, Um, we might ask somebody how they're doing and mean it rather than just a cursory greeting. We show care and concern. We try to be inclusive. We acknowledge people. And even when we're sitting in a coffee shop in a lineup, there's all these unspoken rules that we follow. Like we don't get too close to the person in front of us. And when they're, punching in their pin, we respect that and look away. If we went too close, sometimes people don't want to talk, and you can feel that. Or sometimes people want to chat, and we pick up on these cues. And yeah, it's sort of like how we learn to take care of each other. And one of the reasons I really do like flying Air Canada is that I've noticed that I don't know if it's Air Canada or in Canada in particular. When we land in a plane, we wait and we get off the plane row by row. We let the people in front of us go, and then we know it's our turn, and then people behind us will go. It's so orderly, and we didn't take a class in it. We just do it, and we know to let certain people off first if they're going to miss their plane. But these are all like our little social protocols to take care of each other and to see things function smoothly. We do not like to see others humiliated and tend to respond to identify with their experience. Dignity is central to individual and collective well-being. So this is from the People's Palace in Scotland. It says, if you pass by the mistress on her way down the stairs and she's carrying the potty, you will avoid her eyes and walk by gracefully. If she is without the potty, you will smile and look each other warmly in the eyes. So it's about decorum and not wanting to embarrass her because she's walking with a pot of urine on the stairs in this gorgeous house. So I worked for a number of years in the Yukon in Casca communities, and one of our elders there, Anne Majerator, she shared this story, and it was I think really profound about how little children took care of each other in the so-called residential schools. In Lower Post, when one of the kids would wet their bed, the nuns would make them wear the urine-soaked sheet around their head all the next day. I just remember the long line of sinks. They would make the girls stand in front of the sinks, and they would parade the rest of us past them. It was a threat to us. See what will happen to you if you wet your bed? And it was their way of trying to make us join in humiliating those kids. But none of us did that. We would not look at them. To preserve their dignity, we would all just look away. We all knew instinctively that we did not want to add to their humiliation. Sometimes we did this all day until they were ready. Then maybe at dinner, sitting across the table, they would start to talk. And then we would answer and talk together and get back to normal and not talk about what happened. So you can see all that interaction, decisions, acts of care. They didn't have a meeting about it, they just did it. And looking at that detail is really different than the discourse that we hear about people that were in residential school, like they were traumatized, they froze. this neuropsych stuff. Like they were so traumatized. They had an amygdala hijack and they couldn't do anything. They couldn't help anyone. Um, that's how we talk about people who've been in those really drastic situations when we don't actually take the time to look at the particulars of the situation. And in that context, you see lots of acts of care and resistance and refusing to be separated from loved ones. Children would meet secretly in different places, like when the bell rang and the classes were changing, there was a big sort of center part of the building, and siblings would meet there and they would check in with each other. Maybe they would touch each other or, talk in their language because there were so many people around, they could kind of hide in the crowd. Or other people, older sisters, for example, at night, they would be in a different dormitory than their younger sisters. One woman we know from Vancouver Island named Charlene, she spoke about sneaking out of bed at night when the nuns had left her dormitory and sliding through two rooms, basically along the floor, like a snake underneath all the beds to go and see her sister in the other dormitory and lie with her and sing songs in their language until she fell asleep. And then she would sneak back to her bed. Shirley Lord, a Gwich'in elder from Old Crow, shared this story after she had heard Anne's account, and she described some of her own responses as forms of resistance in we call them the prison camps for children. In the prison camp, they used to put us in separate dorms and close the doors between us so we could not be with our sisters. But there was a small gap under one of the doors. Sometimes at night, me and my sister would lie on the floor and reach under the door and hold hands without saying a word. It was beautiful when I think back on how much comfort that brought us. And still, we're faced with stories like, they don't know how to parent, they don't know how to raise kids. I mean, people say that about themselves too. But when there's so much of that discourse in the air, especially after the Truth and Reconciliation and, the Common Experience process, there was so much talk about trauma, and this became like just currency. Oh, I didn't know how to parent because I was taken away from my parent. But when you actually ask people about how they cared for younger children, they have rich stories to share about that. Hope you're all doing okay there. So I'll just say a brief word about how we analyze the world and interaction, what's going on. So if there's an event in the world, I'll share an example that I commonly share. I probably did it last time too. But can you imagine me working in the Yukon and I'm driving a rental truck thing down the road and I look out and I see a woman, an Indigenous woman walking down the street, and she's got two different shoes on her feet. And so, you know, that's a response to something. So I have to think about like, where does she live? What's going on here? Is she very isolated? Is she rural? Is she living in a like a patriarchal community where men really have the upper hand? What kind of leadership? Is it safe for women and children? That's sort of all the context. Because wherever you live, whenever you have ethical leadership, women and children are just safer as well as everyone else, right? And so within that, you have a social setting. So that could be in a home, in a school, in a daycare center, workplace. So what's the subculture there? Like in that building, are you treated with kindness and respect? Do people enjoy each other's company and have their backs, that kind of thing? Or is it a place where people will throw you under the bus and there's, gossip and undermining competition? So within that context, there's an act of violence or aggression. And whenever the social setting is not very dignified or kind, it creates the conditions where more violence can actually be perpetrated. So in this case, this woman she lives with a man who is very controlling, and every morning before he goes to work, he takes one of each of her shoes and puts it in the trunk of his car. So then she has to respond to that. He doesn't want her to go out. He doesn't want her to go meet her sisters or her friends or talk about what's going on at home. So what does she do? She looks amongst her shoes and finds a left one and a right one and puts them on and decides that she's going to go out. So she walks downtown to do her business. And the next thing we have to consider is how is she treated on the way and when she gets there, when she's in an office. So when I drive by, I'm a social responder, as are we all. Do I wonder, do I apply psychological theories to her? Like, do I go through my learning and say, oh, is she colorblind? Does she have a bad fashion sense? Did her dog eat some of her shoes? Does she have borderline personality disorder, whatever it is? And then I know that everyone else who drives by her also is making up ideas about her. It's quite likely that somebody would open the window of their truck and throw a beer bottle at her. Like that's not unheard of. So if people respond to her with kindness, she's going to do much better during the day and in her life in general. And so maybe she goes to the social service office and she walks in and somebody greets her and says, please take a seat. We'll be with you in a minute. Would you like a glass of water? And then she gets to talk to the worker and says, I've come in because I want some money. I want to leave my husband. I want to take my kids and move to a different town because we want a life of uh, safety and dignity, and we want to get away from his bullshit. And so, what does the worker typically do in Canada? Well, she says, just 1 minute, ma'am, I'll be right with you. And so she goes in the back and she cuts a check for $20,000 and she comes out and she says, here you are, ma'am. Have a nice life. And so, what does that woman do? I mean, she might start crying. She might say, oh, can I give you a hug? Or thank you so much. Like, you've just made such a positive difference for me. And those are how she responds to the social responses. Because when they're really positive and loving and helpful, we just open and say, I'm so grateful. Thank you. Um, but we know that that's not what happens when most Indigenous women go to offices or hospitals. They're not treated very well. And so they have to manage all the mistreatment. Do I record it on my phone? Do I put it on the internet? Do I cry? Do I tell them that I'm not feeling respected? Do I go to the media? Whatever. But when you get a whole bunch of negative social responses, it's so much to manage. And it's just so interesting when you look at the DSM and it has all the lists of all the illnesses we can have. None of them talk about the quality of social responses having any actual influence on the well-being or the suffering of the person. So this is a model that we use to analyze conversation, to guide our interviews, and to guide our writing. Even if I write a report, I'll use these as the headings just so I don't forget. And it's all centered around, dignity and getting accurate descriptions and attending to social justice as best we can. So when people are resisting and responding, they resort to what we call situational logic and personal logic. So things make sense to them in the context of their life. Each situation in which there is violence presents certain dangers and risks and opportunities and not others. An armed robbery in a deserted parking lot presents few options. Open defiance may be unwise. An assault in a private home by a drunk offender with children in the house may present more options. For example, hiding the booze, sending the kids outside, spiking the drink, escape, calling the police. What is the actual social, physical situation and in what context? And the private logic. How did the victim perceive or make meaning of the events and orient to the violence? How did the victim settle on one response over the others? How did this person make sense of the situation as it unfolded and settle on one response over the other, taking into account all the actual and possible responses? Because we do a really quick examination of this space and think, oh, I tried that last time, that didn't work. And I can't do this because the conditions are different. So I'm going to do this. And like we make these decisions in split seconds, which again is so interesting because I believe it's so real. That's why I'm talking like this. But in a lot of the psychological ideas, it says we freeze, fight, flee, fawn, or dissociate, which is not a very expanded list of all the ways that we can respond. So if anyone ever says, "Oh, I did one of those things, I froze," I would say, "Well, how did you freeze? Can you describe that?" And then they would tell me about it and show me about it and how they tried to still their body and not breathe and not move and all that energy and intelligence that goes into the effort to go into something like freezing, right? So we don't take those ideas at face value. So, social interaction is micro, rapid, and nuanced. Small actions, a quick look, a barely discernible grin, a raised eyebrow, a slight scowl, are often highly significant. In long-term relationships, constant vigilance may be required to see small signs of aggression to come. In single incident assaults, micro actions, for example, what you do with your eyes, can have serious consequences. Both violence and resisted are enacted on the micro level, rapidly, on the run. Resistance consists of a myriad of small actions across situations over time and may never reach the level of open or social defiance. I think one of the things that we often do is think, oh, I should have said this or I should have done that or whatever. And I think most people did the best they could in that moment with the information they had and what they understood to be real at that time. And they're honing their resistance strategies to think of some good ones that they can use next time. So, resistance to violence is an ordinary fact. There's nothing new in the fact that adults and children resist violence and other forms of oppression. Resistance is as real and factual as violence. This means that detailed accounts of victims' resistance should be routinely visible in all institutional settings, particularly those that respond to cases of violence and people involved. One caveat there is if it's still really dangerous, then I don't want to expose that woman's resistance strategies or tactics because it could be important information for a perpetrator. But generally, when we're talking about situations and how people manage them, because we want them to feel their, we want to reflect back their agency, their dignity, their intelligence, their inner radars working, their capacity, all these things. We want to reflect that back to them so they don't come away deflated. They come away thinking, yeah, I did something, and I might not have stopped the violence, but I preserved uh, my dignity, or at least I got my own a little bit. Effective intervention begins with an accurate analysis of the facts on the ground, with a minimum of theory. So I'm just going to give you a little quick look at what's the difference between an effect and a response. And obviously, you know why we're talking about effects, because if you look in our profession at the guidebook, the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychological Association, every illness or condition is described with all its effects. And to talk about just a person being an affected thing We're assuming that they're not sentient, that they're not alive. They're just like a rock. So what happens if I kick a rock? Well, does somebody want to answer? What happens if I kick a rock?
Yeah, you might hurt yourself.
Yeah. And what's the rock gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah, the rock's gonna move a bit, it's gonna roll or move forward, and then it's gonna stop. And how far it goes depends on the force that comes out of my foot, right? The rock isn't gonna like stand up on its legs and move around itself unless somebody else moves it, right? But what happens if I kick a person? What might they do?
Any number of things.
Yeah, throw out a few. What might that person?
They might kick you back.
Yeah, they might kick me back, right? Any other ideas? What might they
Might scream or say something. Like, yeah.
They might scream.
Yeah.
Sorry, some of us are farther from the camera or the mic than others. So
Yeah, yeah. They
You
might
want to
scream or
away?
say something, right? They
Yeah.
might say, "Why did you kick me? I didn't do anything." And they might think, "Geez, this is the second person today that's kicked me." Like they might say, "Is there something wrong with me? Like what am I doing?" So what a person does, what they think about it, how they feel, they might feel sad, they might feel angry, um, and how they understand that is different for each person in context and could be a million different things, right? But a person is going to do something back. There's a real like a lively interaction. So what happens if I'm visiting you and you have a cat and you're making me a cup of tea and you go in the next room and your cat is trying to claw my leg. So I pick up the cat and I toss the cat in the air. Um, if the cat's flying through the air, is that an effect or a response?
An effect?
Yeah, the flight of the cat is an effect, right? Because the momentum for that flight came from outside the cat. It came from me. But if in midair, Fluffy turns around to right itself and land on its feet, is that an effect or a response?
Response.
Yeah, because the energy for that movement and the idea to do it came from inside the cat, right? So if I say rain creates umbrellas, does that make any sense? What creates umbrellas?
people.
Yeah, people. Somebody needs to plan it. You need resources, you need fabric, and maybe you need a warehouse or somewhere, right? But somebody had the idea. Let's make umbrellas because there's lots of rain and we need them, right? How about this one? Child abuse creates clinical depression. What do you think of that statement? Is that the same as rain creates umbrellas?
Speaks to describe the effect rather than the response.
Yeah. So it's the same kind of sentence as the one before. So if I ask somebody, how did you know to be sad? It would show that they're understanding adverse events in their life. They are making meaning of them. So orienting to them as worthy of sadness comes from inside the person. So even though this is different than what the good book says, we would say that sadness is a response, what we call depression. It comes from inside the person. because they know not to be happy about abuse. And that comes from how we understand the world and draw from our culture, things like that, right?
Like that.
So imagine that I'm walking through a park and somebody comes and they knock me on the head with a stick and they grab my purse and they run away. So at that moment, I am purseless. Is that an effect or a response?
Fact.
Yeah, that's an effect. So now I'm poor and I'm worried that I don't have enough money now to pay my rent. Is that an effect or a response?
Response.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
worried. And I'm sad because I was going to buy my son a birthday present and now I can't. Effect or response?
Response. Response.
Exactly. And it, here's a tricky one. If I walk by the park and my heart starts pounding, is that an effect or a response?
Response. Response.
Yeah, I think it's a response because I know that that's the park where dangerous things happen to me. Some people would say, oh, it's an effect of your physiology, da 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 da. And, it could be a bit right, but for me, it's mostly a response because I know to be scared because I know that something bad happened to me there, right? So when people talk about their state of mind, we ask, is that a symptom of illness or that choice that they made to resist, that act of resistance, like the child sitting in the desk refusing to open their math book? Is that a symptom of illness or an understandable response to how they feel in the situation? So these are the kinds of differences we try to pull out and say, like for example, many of the behaviors of children are understandable responses to the environment or their family situation or their physiology, even if they're hungry, that kind of thing. But when we're asked to take our children to get a diagnosis so that they can get help, all those behaviors are then decontextualized and presented as if there's a larger illness or condition at work. So this is a little chart. I'm just checking the time here, see how I'm doing with you here. Okay, um, so in a language of effects, we'd have this column on the left. And in response-based practice, this is how we would formulate the same thing. So depression, we would talk about, is there oppression? Is despair a form of protest? If somebody's attention deficit, or could we say they are focused on other things? Are they anxious or worried for a good reason? Are they experiencing effects or enacting responses? Are these symptoms of trauma or symptoms of wellness? One of the things that we say is failure to be contented is one way to talk about, protest. Sadness. I refuse to be contented because I disapprove of this situation. Sleeplessness or wakefulness. Dissociation or imagining safety or going to safe places in your spirit. Lack of trust or demanding that others be trustworthy. Do I have disrupted attachment or do I attach as is possible and safe? Am I numbing or am I managing pain? Am I doing the three F's or am I finding a safe distance? Am I repeating violence or am I repeating resistance? So you can see on the right side, there's just much more agency. People have taken a stand. Like Irving Goffman said, the self is a stance taking entity, moving between opposition and identification. And that's how we form ourselves, also through opposing or resisting. So when you're working with children, this is an interesting activity. It's called the three houses, and we added a rickety response-based shed. So this comes from solution focused therapy, but have you heard of it? Have you been working with the three houses at all?
So,
Okay, so we asked children to draw three houses. The first house is the house of good things, the house of worries, and house of dreams. And then, yeah, this was developed by um, actually by some practitioners in New Zealand. Her name is Nikki. I can't remember her last name right now. So Julie and Shelley, who are therapists in BC, they asked to speak with a young girl, Jenna, who's 6, and they said, "What kind of things would you put in your house of good things?" And she said, "Sometimes my mom and dad don't fight. My counselors are good things. My dog, Doug, my cat, Promise. House of worries. I worry about my mom getting hurt. I worry about my dad driving. Uh, oh, driving my mom away at night. And then the house of dreams. I hope my mommy and daddy will stop fighting. I want to be everything when I grow up." So this is how Jenna responds when she's worried about something. She says, I tuck into bed as straight as the blankets. I watch carefully and listen so I can help my mom. I get scared and cry and try to make the fighting stop. I ask my dad to stop, but he doesn't care. So by documenting this, you can do a lot of assessment and you can really get into the world of the child and understand, what they're living with and what they're dealing with, not just that, oh, they're anxious, right? So when you honor resistance and uphold dignity, what changes? It's a lot to go through here. Are they passive affected or active responding? Are they in the object position of the sentence and in their life or the subject position? Do do they think I am incapable, or do we say you are incapable, or I am competent? I have no boundaries, or they ignored my boundaries. I need skills. I responded skillfully. I'm hypervigilant. I have good radar. I'm depressed. I'm sad at being oppressed. I'm responsible. The offender is responsible. I failed. I did what I could. I let it happen. I couldn't make it stop. Those are really different things, right? Um, I went along with it. I opposed it. I choose abusive guys. I choose decent guys, like at the beginning of the relationship, right? I reenacted my trauma or I reenacted my resistance. I'm sick, abnormal. I'm normal, healthy. I'm odd, pathological. I'm understandable, sensible. I am the problem. Violence is the problem. It's an inner problem or a social problem. And so self-doubt and blame can be replaced with self-respect. So going back to dignity, again, our social life is organized around the according and preserving of dignity. And for us, that involves exploring the interaction so we can really see what the person is dealing with, how they dealt with it, and everything that went into the way that they are responding. Affronts to dignity create immediate social problems that participants work to repair. Humiliation requires just redress. Failure to supply just redress leaves an open social wound, and dignity is central to individual and collective well-being. So this former youth in foster care said, "They said I had an attachment disorder. Really, I had a life disorder. I attached accordingly." So, Yeah, there. I'm just wondering, if you want to see more interviews or talks or whatever, you can note my Substack there, and there's an option you can listen for free, and there's articles and everything on the website, and I can share this with Cynthia in the department, and if you want a copy. And I'm just wondering, we have a couple minutes. Are there any like questions, complaints, reflections, anything you want to share?
Question. Did that last quote come from a child who had been treated within a response-based framework?
Yeah, yeah, in a conversation, yeah. But she was a little bit older when she reflected on that. But as a child, she was always told she had an attachment disorder. And right, when you're in the foster care system, like who feels like they're really safe with all the people around them, right? Thanks. Anyone else want to share a reflection?
Hi.
Somebody in line?
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. Hi. Thank you for this presentation. I've heard your name so often, and it's such a pleasure to be able to hear from you and your practice. I'm curious about, so thank you. I deeply appreciated this and it really resonated with me. I'm curious about your position on psychoeducation, this
Mhm.
idea for clients, and how through the framework that you're introducing, you, or if you even, um, I don't know if that's present for you in this framework in any way, because I can see how it could be contentious.
Yeah, well, we say we don't do psychoeducation. We want to know what people are already knowing and doing. That's like the basis. And so, obviously, say you get diagnosed with a certain disease and you're learning about it, and there's a talk at the hospital about the disease, you might go because you want to learn something. Um, and they would call that psychoeducation. So, of course, if you want to go, you should go. But I think the person doing the presentation should really start with the idea that everyone in the room knows something already about this. So let's start with putting on the table, what do we already know? And how have you been managing so far? And start with the collective knowledge that's present, not assume that they know nothing, that you're the expert and they're just like the population that you need to inject your good ideas into. I'm just reading a paper again because I'm going to teach later about advice giving, and it's so interesting when there's asymmetry, they call it, when there's a power imbalance. If somebody with more power gives unsolicited advice to someone else, what is going to happen is that person is going to say something to preserve their dignity. They're going to say something like, "Oh yeah, I already tried that. It didn't work." Or "That's what my mom said to do." Or "I saw that on Oprah." Like they always say something just to try to reassert the power dynamic. So we have to be really careful about giving unsolicited advice. But it's okay if people come to you because they want information. I think it's important to start with, what have you already tried? And how did that work? And find out a little bit about, like, do you have people around you that support you? Are you alone in this? I think it's good to find a little bit out about what kind of support network they have, and just not make assumptions. So I hope that's helpful.
No, it's incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a thing we call the Colonial Code in the Helping Professions, and it's from a Nick Todd and Alan Wade article from 1994, Parallel Objectifying Practices. And it goes like this. They say in the helping professions, just like in colonization, there's a code that says, you are deficient. I am proficient. So deficient means, like you're indigenous or you're uneducated or pagan or dark skinned or poor or whatever. And I am proficient. So I'm probably university educated, or maybe white, or in a dominant category. I'm proficient. So therefore, I have the right, and then in brackets, duty, responsibility, obligation to perform certain functions on you, like for your own good. And then I added, while I steal your stuff or make money off you. That was my addition, because the suffering of Indigenous people really is one of the biggest businesses in Canada. Like when you think of all of us, even me, who make money offering services to broken Indigenous people, it really is a big business. So that colonial code is still at work. And so I think as ethical, responsible people and practitioners, we have to do what we can to make more horizontal the power relations. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. As always, you make me rethink so many things, and I'm so grateful. Now, I'm really, really rethinking internalized ableism, just gotta tell you. So,
Yay.
really rethinking about all of the ways that it has served my survival and advancement. So, rethinking, renaming, yeah.
Yeah, it's not you, it's them.
Yeah, I know. That's never a popular stance, though, just saying. As you well know. So, thank you so much for joining us. Let's in the room, maybe have the
Thank you. It's so good to see all of you. And
thank you so much for spending this time with us. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
yeah, my pleasure. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.